Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Business at 9 with all the big buzzing business news stories of the day. I'm joining you from our studios here in Mumbai on this edition of Business at 9. But first, a lot of moving pieces when it comes to the political sphere. Just very recently, it was moments ago that the Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge has given a statement. This happened after that meeting that took place of the India Alliance members, and Congress at the moment seems to be indicating that it will let the NDA form the government. But interestingly, Mr. Kharge has stated that appropriate steps will be taken at the appropriate time. It isn't quite clear what he means when he says that, but this even as the NDA leaders have rallied around Mr. Modi to form the next government. Letters of support have been given in, and that includes the JDU and the TDP. But listen in to what Mallikarjun Kharge has said just moments ago after the meeting that took place over at his own residence of all the India bloc members.
The people's mandate has given befitting reply to the BJP and their politics of hate, corruption and deprivation. This is a mandate in defense of the Constitution of India and against price rise, unemployment and crony capitalism, and also to save democracy. The India bloc will continue to fight against the fascist rule of the BJP led by Modi. We will take appropriate steps at the appropriate time, realize the people's desire not to be ruled by the BJP's government.
Well, that's what we got from Mr. Kharge at the end of the meeting over at on the NDA side. There was a meeting that took place. Of course, there was no formal kind of speech that happened after that meeting took place over at the Prime Minister's residence in Delhi at 7 Lok Kalyan. But of course, we do understand that letters of support have gone out to the Prime Minister. And earlier today, after the meeting with the Cabinet and the Council of Ministers, the resignations have been tendered to the President. And we will wait and see how soon the President takes to invite Mr. Modi to form the next government. But letters of support have been given by the members of the NDA, and that includes from Mr. Naidu and Mr. Nitish Kumar. So that's as far as political developments go. Now the big question is, when it comes to the moving pieces on how to manage a coalition, as far as the Modi government's last 10 years are concerned, there has been this big push towards infrastructure. How is that likely to change in a coalition era, where Mr. Modi will have a lot of balancing to do when it comes to coalition members? That's where we question how the infrastructure push is going to take place. Let's discuss this. Vinayak Chatterjee is the founder and managing trustee at the Infravision Foundation, and he joins us. So it's great to have you. First, I want to get your reaction to the outcome of the elections. The verdict has come as a surprise. It has been a surprise, of course, as far as broad expectations are concerned. What is your takeaway?
Look, I am not a social scientist or a political commentator. I largely restrict my comments to the infrastructure sector, which is my area of expertise. So I hope you will not mind if I constrain myself and my comments to the infrastructure sector. So today's political developments, to my mind, will not significantly affect the infrastructure journey, for the simple reason that since 2014, for the last 10 years, the government has followed a very consistent policy of using infrastructure investments stroke public expenditure to continuously pump prime the economy. And I do not think any government in coalition or in any other form is actually going to stray away from this path, because it has got to keep its eye on the GDP ball. And between us, GDP is being pump primed by infrastructure investments. In fact, I have with me a piece of confidential information which was shared by a very, very senior bureaucrat after the budget, during the budget, post-budget discussions last year, that the government has a confidential document that a 1 rupee spent on infrastructure leads to 3 rupees of GDP, whereas 1 rupee spent on direct benefit transfer in any form or manner leads to 90 paisa on GDP. So if we are to keep the growth momentum of the economy going between 7 and 8%, which is a very happy momentum right now, there is no question of in any form, shape or manner reducing the infrastructure investments. They will be at the same pace, which is what my feeling right now is, and that will continue to provide the momentum for creating jobs, for creating secondary demand, for the buoyancy in tax collections, GDP, etc., etc. So back to you, but just to make the point that I don't think there'll be any structural shifts in the infrastructure total spend.
But fair enough. Looking at the kind of form and direction that we can expect when it comes to the policy and infrastructure, Mr. Chatterjee, walk us through the kind of changes that you're expecting going ahead.
While I did say that the total quantum and numbers from a budgetary point of view and an economy point of view will not change for infra spend, I do agree with you that there could be certain tonal changes in the composition of the infrastructure spend. For example, it is possible that once all of us do a deep dive on the meaning of the election results today, you will find that much of it could be attributed potentially to rural distress. If that is so, then a larger portion of the infra budget may be spent on rural infrastructure, in major and minor irrigation projects, in restoration of water bodies, in modern warehouses, cold storages, in that sector, rural housing. So you could see tonal changes in the sectoral shift in or sectoral allocation of infrastructure, and that is my point of view on this, that total will broadly remain the same to pump prime the economy.
So, yes, absolutely, Mr. Chatterjee. Again, point taken. But tonality-wise, if there are changes, do you also believe that the focus on logistics, when you look at transport as a broad theme, is that going to shift, perhaps from roads to railways?
Look, even before the election results came out, there was almost a convergence of view that in whatever form, shape or manner the election results came out, in the next avatar of infrastructure spends, the balance is going to shift away from roads, which has reached a certain level of maturity in the last 20 years. And now the focus is really going to shift from road to rail. And because there is a huge amount of work to be done in railways for the next 10 to 15 years, whether it is new tracks, dedicated freight corridors, high-speed trains, station redevelopment, safety, etc., etc. So anyway, the focus is going to change. And if there is going in a situation where roads have reached a level of maturity and you are going to shift focus to railway and multimodalism and all that, then it only affects the logistics, the logistics policy positively, because that is part of the logistics policy, that the share of freight from the rail in the railways will increase significantly. So I don't see any dichotomy there. I think these tonal shifts that will happen, some of them would have been happened in any case, even if the BJP had come in with a whopping majority. And I think many of them will continue, but yes, there will be tonal shifts.
Fair enough. But the infrastructure spending that we've seen over the last 10 years, Mr. Chatterjee, that has been propelled by the government's push. As we've seen in annual budgets year on year, we've seen how the push has increased. But going ahead, how much of a role will private capex play in building India's infrastructure?
Look, private spending in infrastructure is still to pick up. So let's just keep that on the side. If the government significantly lowers its budgetary spends and allocations on infrastructure, it is surely going to impact GDP and economic growth. And that is the last thing any new government wants, whether coalition or no coalition. So I'm once again reiterating my point that the overall momentum of infrastructure spends, and the momentum has been every year, infrastructure outlays in the budget have increased in the last 5-6 years from 20 to 30%. Has been the allocation increase year by year in the central budget, and that is matched. The thumb rule in the sector is that what the central government spends, the other three constituencies spend an equal amount, that states, extra budgetary resources, meaning PSUs, and the private sector. So I don't think any government is going to reduce the momentum and quantum of public expenditure in infra at the cost of reducing economic growth. So, I mean, what would they have achieved? This story is clear across any economic dispensation. So it's going to be a very hard decision for any policymaker to say, okay, guys, now let's reduce expenditure on infrastructure. You will see the level of GDP falling, and the nation can ill afford that.
You're sounding quite sanguine about the possibility of the pace and the amount of investments into infrastructure, Mr. Chatterjee. The pace and size of disinvestment as well. Now, that has been a bit of a disappointment for India Inc. How do you see the course of divestments change with the next government?
I share the disappointment. I've been one of those people for the last 10 years who've seen year after year after year disinvestment targets and privatization targets and asset monetization targets not being achieved by a wide margin. And I think it's important because in infrastructure, there is the twin engine at work. One is the government spends, and then when a project is ready, the government monetizes. So it's not good to have one engine firing away and the other engine spluttering. So I just hope that whatever is the dispensation and the policy people in place today in the new government, that a far more practical, vigorous, and political will is demonstrated in terms of privatization, stroke monetization, stroke disinvestment. I completely agree with you.
Fair enough, but what about foreign investment as well? While Make in India has been this credo, Mr. Chatterjee, to get FDI, it has been a mainstay for the outgoing government. What measures do you see the government push through with in the future to get more foreign investments into infrastructure? Is that likely to happen?
Look, a large portion of the alternative to China lies in the foreign investor appreciating the efficiency of the Indian ecosystem, eco-environment. And that once again brings us back to infrastructure. Forget the legal side of it, rules, regulations, income tax. I am no expert on those. But one of the biggest things that FDI looks at is the manufacturing or is the economic ecosystem efficient? And that once again brings us back to infrastructure. That it is only if you do things like improve logistics and connectivity and port turnaround and roads that you will create an atmosphere where increasingly FDI will feel confident of coming in. Now, particularly for the infrastructure sector, FDI does not come into greenfield projects because they find it very difficult to manage to do new projects in India, which are called greenfield. They normally come in once a project is established, shows regular cash flows, and that's called brownfield monetization. Well, India has demonstrated that it can do that pretty well. In fact, the road sector has demonstrated that it has crossed the 1 lakh crore mark in InvITs, which is the monetization of state-owned road assets. So my simple point is, why doesn't this success of the road sector be now translated into sector after sector after sector, whether it's railways or ports? Why doesn't the government disinvest state-owned operating assets, and where in a situation FDI is only willing to pick up operating brownfield projects?
So if it is going to be operating brownfield projects in the future, and if there is that push towards it as well, you think that there is going to be enough interest, especially if India wants to kind of go ahead and see the opportunity in the China plus one strategy that many corporates have looking at, then perhaps that's where you're saying the interest would lie. But while rankings are showing there is an improvement for India, when it comes to the ease of doing business, how do you think we've risen further on that count? And in times in the future, do you think that we can better our score?
It's a complex subject. In infrastructure, there are a whole bunch of rules at the central level. There are a bunch of rules at the state level. There are bunches of rules at the local, town, or district level. All of them interplay, whether it is right of way where you have to remove whether you have to remove a transmission tower or build a bridge over a railway line. All of these interact with each other. The three levels of state, federal, state, and local body, and different institutions like irrigation, railways, electricity transmission, etc., etc. All of them interplay to create obstacles to infrastructure investments going smoothly. A lot of that has got cleared. But there is still a significant journey to do to harmonize the entire pathway. And I think that should be one of the clear ease of doing business, not just in infra, but in the economy as a whole, I understand, is one of the key deliverables of any government.
If you are going to highlight for us the big deliverables of the next government, you're saying any government infrastructure push would have to be big. But what would be your big expectations. Of course, this government will have to come through very quickly in the preparation of the next budget as well. So when you're penning down your expectations of the next government, what you'd like to see in evidence being reflected in the next budget, what would those be?
Look, infrastructure is a long list, but what I will tell you on a program like this for your viewers is I will just very quickly outline 6 major expectations. The first one is that I'm expecting a very major shift in focus and budgetary outlays from road to rail. The second is that I'm looking at a very concerted reform of state roadways. The sum total of state buses and city buses today carry 3 times the passenger load that Indian Railways carries every day. And it's a sorely neglected sector. So the upgradation of STUs called state roadways, including involvement of the private sector and including their transitioning into EV buses, is a very major expectation. That's point 2. Point 3, on power, I expect very heavy emphasis on green energy, not so much on installation of solar and wind, which has got momentum, but on storage, which is PSP, pump storage projects, and hydrogen. And in electricity private distribution, I'm expecting clear-cut policy and political will on either privatization of discoms or allowing second licenses or what are called parallel licenses. On the fourth point, a very major point that has always been a pre-budget request from industry is that the 28% GST on cement is completely irrational. In fact, very senior members of the political process and bureaucrats in the finance ministry have off record confirmed that there is no rational reason to have a 28% GST on cement. I hope that in the coming years or even in the forthcoming GST councils, that cement GST will be brought down from 28. It's an Aam Aadmi product and it will bolster construction and all kinds of positive activity down to about 12%. The fifth and second last point is to fully move ahead on the momentum that we have seen on the Jal Jeevan Mission, which is a very significant program for India's population to have potable 24/7 potable drinking water in every household with a piped connection. And I think that momentum should be given full force. And India has had the first census on water bodies. So with the water crisis looming large, a concerted plan for revitalization of water bodies in urban and rural India. And my last point is a very, very special focus on urban infrastructure. 2 special items that I have on my wish list is 1, each city of a certain size should have UMTA, UMTA, Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority, that synergizes all modes of transport. And we should very aggressively push municipal bonds as a means of long-term funding of our city infrastructure. I could go on, but I just told you that I'd give you 6 points. So here they are.
No, those are very precise points and we appreciate you being as candid as you have been. But I noticed that some of those points were addressing issues around climate change, and those are going to play a very important part in our country, elsewhere in the world as well. And many governments are grappling, trying to hit the targets. How do you think India is going to meet its targets under the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Look, the story on renewables is unfolding pretty well.
Okay.
All our targets of 500 gigawatts by 2030, our sustainability trajectory, our push towards solar, wind, etc., are going pretty well. Every year, the share of green over fossil fuels is increasing. So we have got a positive story going there. The question really is that we now need to shift emphasis to see that we have 24/7 source of green energy, so that even when the sun is not shining or when the wind is not blowing, we have a constant source of energy supply from renewable sources, which means simple storage. Storage today comes in 2 shapes and sizes. One is batteries and one is pump storage. And lurking in the wings is the possibility of hydrogen in the next 5 to 7 years. But in the next 5 years, I think the government should really focus on storage, so that as policy measures kick in and incentives happen and there are more and more projects for storage, I think the green story can only get better.
Yes, Mr. Chatterjee, on the political front, there might be as much of a push and pull to manage a coalition government to push through with the infrastructure building agenda that the last 10 years of the Modi government have seen. It's going to be an important piece, and some of the points that you've highlighted very, very crucial. The longevity of this policy, the continuity of this policy is an important piece that we'll be tracking the next government for. Mr. Chatterjee, such a pleasure chatting with you on the infrastructure front. Thank you indeed for joining us on this edition of Business at 9.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.